The day started like any other. I was a seasoned pilot with over 15 years of experience under my belt, and today was just another routine flight. The weather was clear, and my cargo plane, a reliable old beast, had been checked and double-checked. I felt confident as I ascended into the sky, the hum of the engines a comforting backdrop. 3 hours into the flight, everything changed. Without warning, the instruments began to flicker, the autopilot disengaged, and the radio cut out. I tried not to panic, but it was as if the plane had a mind of its own. I wrestled with the controls, managing to maintain some semblance of control as the altimeter spun wildly. Then, out of nowhere, a dense fog enveloped the plane, reducing visibility to zero. Desperate, I searched for a place to land and spotted a small airfield below. With no other options, I guided the plane down, hoping the fog would clear enough for a safe landing. It did, just in time, and I touched down smoothly on an isolated runway. Breathing a sigh of relief, I taxied to a halt and shut down the engines. The airfield was eerily quiet, surrounded by dense woods. There was no control tower, no hangars, just the runway and a small, dilapidated building that looked like it hadn't seen use in decades. I decided to investigate, hoping to find someone who could help me with the plane's sudden failures. The building was empty, covered in dust and cobwebs. I found an old phone, but the line was dead. As I stepped outside, I noticed a narrow path leading through the woods, presumably towards a nearby town. With nothing else to do, I followed it. The town, nestled in a clearing, seemed quaint and welcoming at first. It had all the trappings of normalcy, a diner, a general store, a few houses. The people were friendly, though their smiles felt just a bit too forced, their eyes lingering on me a moment too long. I asked about the airfield and any potential help for my plane, but received vague answers. "You're welcome to stay as long as you need," one of them said, a hint of something unsettling in his tone. Ignoring the creeping unease, I decided to stay overnight and try to get back to the plane in the morning. Morning came, and I returned to the airfield, determined to leave this strange place behind. But as I prepped the plane for takeoff, the fog rolled in again, thick and impenetrable. I waited, hoping it would lift, but it clung stubbornly to the ground. Determined not to be thwarted, I decided to take off anyway. I knew it was risky, but I had to get out of there. The plane roared to life, and I sped down the runway, lifting into the fog. For a moment, it felt like I had escaped, but then, as the fog cleared, I found myself back on the same runway, touching down as if I had never left. Confusion and frustration set in. I tried again, this time flying in the opposite direction, but the result was the same. Each attempt to leave brought me back to the same cursed runway. I spent the day making multiple attempts, altering the flight path, altitude, speed, nothing worked. I was trapped. Back in town, I demanded answers, but the townspeople only offered cryptic responses. "It's best if you don't try to leave," one of them said. "You'll only make it harder on yourself." The next morning, I felt a strange sense of dread as I approached the airfield. The fog was waiting, thick and foreboding. I made another attempt to take off, but the same thing happened. I was brought back to the runway. On my third attempt, the plane's instruments went haywire. The compass spun wildly, and the altimeter showed impossible readings. I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead as I realized I was losing control. The fog grew denser, and a strange humming sound filled the cockpit, vibrating through my bones. I could barely see the runway as I landed once more, my hands shaking on the controls. Returning to the town, I noticed something disturbing. The people seemed to be waiting for me. Their smiles were unnervingly wide, their eyes cold. I shivered and hurried past them, feeling their gaze on my back. That night, I dreamed of the fog, thick and suffocating, wrapping around the plane like a shroud. I saw shadowy figures moving within it, their eyes glowing with an unnatural light. I woke with a start, heart pounding, convinced that the fog was more than just a natural phenomenon. Desperate to escape, I decided to explore the town more thoroughly. In the local diner, I struck up a conversation with an old man sitting alone at the counter. He seemed different from the others, more aware, more attuned to the strangeness of the situation. His expression was grave as he looked at me, a flicker of pity in his eyes. Back at the airfield, I noticed something strange. The ground around the runway was littered with old, decaying plane wreckage, as if countless others had tried to escape and failed. I felt a chill run down my spine. What was this place? Determined to find a way out, I searched the town for any clues. In the library, I found an old, dusty map that showed the layout of the town and the surrounding woods. It indicated a hidden bunker near the airfield. Hoping it might hold some answers, I set out to find it. The bunker was hidden beneath a thick layer of moss and dirt, its entrance barely visible. Inside, I found rows of old, rusted equipment and stacks of documents. As I sifted through the papers, I found reports of strange magnetic anomalies and inexplicable weather patterns around the airfield. It seemed the place was a nexus of supernatural activity, trapping anyone who entered. I also found a journal detailing the experiences of a previous pilot who had been trapped here. His entries were filled with desperation and fear, recounting his failed attempts to escape and the horrifying visions he had endured. He mentioned a strange, unmarked grave in the woods that seemed to be the source of the anomalies. With a sense of foreboding, I set out to find the grave. The woods were dark and silent, the air thick with tension. As I approached the spot marked on the map, I saw a small, weathered headstone overgrown with weeds. The ground around it was disturbed, as if something had been buried and then dug up. As I stood there, I felt a presence behind me. Turning, I saw the ghostly figure of a man, his eyes hollow and sorrowful. He reached out to me, his hand passing through my shoulder like a cold breeze. In that moment, I understood he was the previous pilot, trapped in a cycle of failed attempts to escape. I knew I had to break the cycle, but how? The journal mentioned confronting the source of the anomaly, the grave. With trembling hands, I began to dig, uncovering a small, ornate box. Inside, I found a locket with a picture of a woman and a child, along with a note written in a shaky hand. It was a plea for forgiveness, a confession of guilt for a terrible accident that had cost their lives. Realizing that the pilot's guilt and sorrow had anchored the anomaly, I knew what I had to do. I returned to the airfield with the locket and the note. As I stood on the runway, I whispered a prayer for the lost souls, asking for their forgiveness and release. The air grew still, and for a moment, I feared nothing had changed. But then, the fog began to lift, the dense mist dissolving into the clear morning air. The ghostly presence faded, a look of peace on his face. I climbed into the cockpit, feeling a strange sense of calm. As I taxied down the runway, the sky clear and bright, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. The plane lifted smoothly into the air, and this time, I didn't turn back. The airfield disappeared beneath me, and I flew into clear skies, free at last. The town, the runway, the looping cycle, all were behind me now. I had faced the supernatural, confronted the guilt of a soul trapped in time, and broken free. As I soared through the sky, I felt a sense of liberation I had never known. The endless runway was behind me, and the open skies awaited.